session now that will last about an hour. It is the session that is meant for us to take advantage of the presence with us of some very highly experienced people in this field. It is a coincidence that my three co-panelists here are from Latin America mainly, which is fantastic because Latin America has had probably the longest experience in PPP than any other part of the world. I know that people usually think of the UK when they think the start of PPP, but I can tell you that Latin America was right up there very early on with infrastructure projects in PPP that have really helped develop the field for the rest of the world. So I think we are missing Georgie. I was like, Latin America, where is Georgie? So yes, I actually had the privilege of working on some of the Latin American PPPs in the late 1980s and early 1990s when we were all still learning and figuring out how to do these things. So, Minister Khulud al-Saqaf of Jordan, I think, is fashionably late. This is tradition in the Middle East for ministers not to arrive on time. So we will wait for her to arrive. We will not wait, but we will start, and then hopefully she will join us in due course. Allow me to start by introducing Mr. Miguel Siliceo, an old friend with whom we've worked in Mexico together. Miguel is the head of the investment unit of the Ministry of Finance of Mexico. Before that, he was CFO and Deputy Director General of Finance and International Relations at Banco Mext, which is Mexico's foreign trade bank. He was member of the Board of Directors and Deputy Director General of Administration at Banobras, which is Mexico's Public Works and Infrastructure Bank. And he was Director of External Debt at Mexico's Ministry of Finance. So when we talk about PPP and the impact on national debt, Miguel has a lot to teach us. He studied economics at the London School of Economics and has a master's degree in economics from the Tec de Monterrey and the University of London. I will give each panelist about up to 8 minutes to make some remarks about the general topic that we are discussing today. And then with the time that's left, I will be asking them some questions. So Miguel, the floor is yours.
I really, thank you, buenos días. I really appreciate the invitation of WAPP and UNCTAD for this special event. For me, it's very relevant to share part of the experience that we have had in our country in terms of the utilization of the PPPs projects. I was talking to Christophe yesterday night and to Alex that in Mexico, one of the issues that we have found in the country that we have is that probably the lack of participants to be more active in terms of development of these APPs has resulted probably more on the side that at the end, at the middle of the way, probably the PPPs are a little bit expensive, and you have committed to pay annually certain rates that basically you cannot change so easily for the rest of the period. Then in that particular case, one of the issues that we have learned, I don't know what the experience of the people that are here in the salon, but probably we have tried to design these projects with certain bulbs of revision every 3, 5, or 6 years in order to revise if the concept that was originally created, the PPPs, still in place. Because, for example, I give one example. We built some jails in Mexico, and the concept and the whole project was established for 30 years, and we have to pay for 500 people in the jail, whether is in the jail or not. Then after we have this project in place, we have an outstanding of 200 people, not 500. Then we have to revise the PPP downwards. Then under this circumstance, most of the projects do not contemplate, at least in Mexican case, to have the chance to really to reset, to revise, and probably to have a new modification agreement in order to continue the PPPs. Then the situation that we have in our countries, basically we decide to cancel the PPP, which is not a good sign, and try to restart it because we do not have the mechanism to revise this kind of thing. The other problem that we have, in terms of the financing part, the developers who wants to enter in a project for, let's say, 20 or 30 years, normally they get financing from international markets for multilateral organization or the capital markets for 25, 30 years, and they provide financing, they provide the project. Probably today, the utilization of certain mechanisms in terms of call options or futures in order that we can revise the cost of the cost of financing behind the projects will be something useful to utilize. Then in our case, as Alex mentioned, in America Latina, in Mexico, we are a country that the budget is not enough to create infrastructure. And today, the country faces one of the biggest challenges probably in nowadays. Is basically something that we have in Mexico. It's called nearshoring. Nearshoring is basically that most of the companies is trying to establish in Mexico to access to the American market. Then once we have this crisis of COVID in all over the world, most of the companies that was basically based in this area, in Asia, in Japan and so on, they are moving to Mexico because in Mexico they can access this American market. And for instance, probably a big advantage that Mexico has is that we have 3,000 kilometers with the strongest economy of the world. We have oceans, we have oil, lithium, demographic bonus. Then the expectation of the country to improve his position in the world economy is very strong. Then the need of infrastructure and to have this kind of PPP projects is a good opportunity, but maybe we have to redesign and to try to understand that these lessons that we have learned by the moment has been quite painful for the country because at the end the PPPs burden of basically average on the rest of the budget for the following years. Then to summarize, I think that the PPPs project is a very important tool of development to help development. Today face a good challenge because the situation that we have, at least in our country, with this situation of the free trade agreement with America and so on, and as I mentioned, the nearshoring, but we have really to revise carefully what are the rules for the following years for the APPs.
Thank you so much, Miguel. This is fantastic that you're sharing all this experience with us. I invite you all, not only for Miguel, but the rest of our panelists, please take advantage of their presence here, seek them out later on, and ask them more questions beyond this session. I received word that Minister Saqaf is unable to attend because she's been taken ill and has had to go to the hospital. So unfortunately, we wish her well. Hope she gets better very soon. But we'll go now to Mr. Narek Teryan, who is Deputy Minister of Economy at the Republic of Armenia, and he's breaking the Latin American monopoly of this panel. Prior to his current position, Narek Teryan was the managing partner at Dialogue Consulting Company. and an advisor to the Moscow regional government. He has held key roles in several other organizations, including Bank Rossiyski Capital, in Promsvyansk Bank, I probably killed that word, and Alpha Bank. So Narek, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, thank you, Mr. Hayek, for this discussion. First, I'd like to do some overview about Armenian economic for recent years. In recent years, Armenia has achieved remarkable economic growth and made significant contribution to various sectors. Armenian impressive economic performance is evident in its GDP growth rates. We witnessed a remarkable 12.6% growth in 2022 and 10.5% increase in the first half of 2023. So it's reflecting the strength of our economy. This growth is attributable to several factors, including our focus on technology, a thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem, and highly skilled workforce. Armenia has long understood that economic progress is intrinsically linked to the ability to attract foreign investment. In recent years, we have taken significant steps to create an environment that is conducive to investment, not only by streamlining our domestic policies, but also by actively participating in international policy discussions. I'd like to share with you some insight into our approach. Armenia has embarked on comprehensive reform journey to enhance its investment climate. We have introduced a one-stop shop for investors, simplifying the administrative procedures, reducing bureaucratic, and improving transparency in government dealings. Our committing to these reforms is evident in our efforts to create a business-friendly ecosystem, making it easier for both domestic and foreign investors. Armenia recognizes that successful PPPs are founded on strong partnership. We are committed to fostering collaboration between the public and private sectors, viewing these partnerships as essential for achieving our development goals. Infrastructure development is a cornerstone of Armenia growth strategy. We have identified key sectors such as transportation, energy, and digital infrastructure for strategic investment through PPPs. And we have successful examples for it. For example, we have done with the Masdar big solar plant in Armenia for 200 megawatts. We signed it last year and it started developing. To ensure a conducive environment for PPPs, Armenia has been actively refining its regulatory framework. We understand that legal clarity, stability, and transparency are paramount to attract private sector investors. Our commitment to regulatory excellence aligns with international best practice. Armenia values international collaboration in PPP development. We actively engage with international organizations, financial institutions to exchange best practice, seek funding opportunities, and expand the scope of our PPP initiatives. In conclusion, I'd like to say that Armenia stands ready to forge stronger PPP partnerships, drive infrastructure development, enhance our regulatory framework, and fortify our economic resilience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Narek. I'm sorry I didn't get to hear much of what you said, but I get the gist of it. Without further ado, let me go on to Mr. Marco Yinas. Marco is Director of the Production, Productivity and Management Division at the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. He has worked for more than 20 years in both the private and public sectors on agendas and policies related to competitiveness, productive development, industry policy, regional development, trade policy, education, innovation, and entrepreneurship. He's the author of the book, I like the title, Cluster Initiatives, a concrete and effective way to move the needle of productivity. Productivity is the key to economic development, so looking forward to hear what you have to say, Marco.
Well, good morning, everybody, and first of all, thank you very much to UNCTAD, CIAD, and WAPPP for inviting ECLAC to the World Investment Forum, and in particular to this PPPs Forum. I would like to divide my intervention in two. In the first part, I would like to talk about PPPs in the context that we were invited to talk about. But in the second, I would like to talk about a different type of PPPs, one that we consider not only crucial to foster investment, but more generally, that we consider fundamental for economic transformation and growth. So let me start, Siad, with the first type of PPPs. In Latin America and the Caribbean, investment in infrastructure has been relatively meager since the 1990s. In 1980, average investment in infrastructure for the main economies of the region represented 3.6% of GDP. This figure declined progressively over the following years to 2.2% in the 1990s, then to 1.9% in the first decade of the 2000s, before finally dropping to 1.54% between 2019 and 2021. The result is a widening infrastructure gap. So public-private partnerships were introduced in LAC countries just before the start of the 1990s, and their purpose was attracting private capital to replace the state's financing role of services of public interest. Therefore, the region has more than 30 years of experience in the field, and several infrastructure projects were possible because of PPPs. Between 1980 and 2017, there were almost 2,100 PPP projects distributed in 20 LAC countries, which is a compelling example of the importance of this contracting modality in infrastructure development. Sectoral composition showed a high participation of the energy sector with 40% of the projects, followed by transportation with 26%, telecommunications with 21%, and water and sanitation with 13%. Mexico and Brazil had the largest share of projects. From 1980 to 2017, Brazil accounted for 617 projects, which represents almost 30% of the total concessions in the entire region. The second most important country was Mexico with 389 projects, or almost 19% of the total, followed by Chile with 11%, Peru with 10.3%, Colombia with 6.8%, and Argentina with 6.4%. A prerequisite for the success of PPP initiatives is that both the public and private sectors are willing and committed to the projects, understanding that there may be advantages for both parties. The public sector faces relevant challenges when working on PPPs, and among them we can point first identifying potential partners and areas of common interest, and second, the existence of institutional spaces for such agreements. So to face these challenges, public agents need to develop capabilities, and we talk about, first of all, technical capabilities. So the public sector needs to be trained and qualified to design these partnerships, to negotiate the terms to be agreed upon, to carry out studies, meaning assessment studies and feasibility studies, as well as to create mature institutional spaces that allow these agreements to be viable and to mitigate mistrust from the public and from control entities. And second, programmatic capabilities. Agents from the public sector must be trained so that they understand which are the priority areas and how joint action with the private sector can be beneficial. So now let me talk, Siad, about the second type of PPPs. But before we get into it, let me give you a little bit of context of why this type of PPP is needed. Latin America and the Caribbean will be completing this year, in terms of growth, a worse decade than the infamous lost decade of the 1980s. In the decade going from 2014 to 2023, our region will be having an average growth of around 0.8%, which is much lower than the 2% achieved during the lost decade. The main culprit of this slow growth is a stagnant productivity, which has remained practically constant during the last decades. If we don't address the productivity challenge, it will be difficult for LAC countries to address other impending challenges, such as persistent poverty levels, high levels of inequality, improve our education and health systems, and even address our climate change-related challenges. As Paul Krugman reminds us, productivity isn't everything, but in the long run, it's almost everything. Economic history has taught us that in order to increase our productivity, we need to upgrade and diversify our economies. Upgrading, understood as increasing the productivity of current economic activities, and diversifying, understood as jumping into new activities with higher levels of productivity. Now, unfortunately, these two processes of upgrading and diversification don't take place spontaneously. There are many bottlenecks that hinder them. So in order to foster this production transformation, we need to address these bottlenecks. But addressing them will require our second type of PPPs. It will require a profound coordination between the public sector, private sector, academia, and civil society representatives. More specifically, it will require escalating our industrial policy efforts, or as we like to call them at ECLAC, our productive development policy efforts, understood as the instruments and efforts aimed directly at fostering these upgrading and diversification processes. Productive development policies include both horizontal and vertical agendas and instruments. Horizontal understood as those cross-cutting different sectors, and vertical understood as those focused on prioritized sectors or clusters or areas or challenges. While bottlenecks are infinite, resources are not. And I'm not talking about financial resources only, but also institutional capabilities and political capital. Therefore, paraphrasing Harvard professors Roderick and Hausman, we are doomed to prioritize. Productive development policies involve the joint work between the public and private sectors along many fronts. It involves working on science and technology and innovation agendas, on technology extension services, on entrepreneurship efforts, on bridging skills mismatches, on foreign direct investment attraction agendas seeking to maximize the spillovers and technology transfers that FDI could provide. It involves also working on providing specific public goods and infrastructure which are needed to address coordination failures among many other fronts. Now, we say that as it happens when cooking, even more important than each of these individual ingredients is the way that we combine them. Therefore, we're stressing out at ECLAC the importance of two cross-cutting dimensions that gives us insights as to how to combine these ingredients. First of all, we are insisting on productive development policies with a territorial approach. We keep saying that productivity is very much a local phenomenon that must be addressed at the local level with local actors. In that sense, we're pushing so that territories all across Latin America and the Caribbean work on strategic productive development agendas at the subnational level. In particular, we're suggesting cluster initiatives as a concrete and effective way of organizing productive development efforts at the local level through PPP institutional arrangements that allow the articulation of multiple stakeholders to work on strategic agendas to improve productivity of the private sector. Second of all, we're insisting on the issue of governance for productive development as a fundamental one for the success of productive development efforts. Productive development policies are coordination intensive. They obviously require public-private articulation, but they also require public-public articulation, as well as private-private articulation. Moreover, they also require articulation throughout different levels of government, needing the coordination of national level efforts with subnational ones. Therefore, the institutional arrangements and incentives become crucial to articulate multiple efforts, actors, and resources under strategic productive development agendas. So to wrap up, PPPs understood in a broader way as joint efforts between the public and private sectors to work on productivity enhancing agendas, projects, and activities are fundamental in the implementation of industrial policies or productive development policies. Moreover, Syed, these productive development agendas can be fertile ground for the implementation of the first type of PPPs. We definitely need to escalate our productive development efforts if we want to move the needle of productivity in our region, and that way improve the well-being of our people, which we shall not forget is the main purpose of this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm so happy to hear you, Marco, and say what you said. It is common in the PPP community to only focus, not only, but to focus mostly on projects, and this project, and this tender, and this best practice, and we forget the big picture. And this is something that we at WAPP have always been saying, that most important before you get to the project is get to the policy. Get to the policy, put it in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals. Part of those goals obviously are the issues of planet and society, but also prosperity. And prosperity has to do with the economic factors that you're talking about. We talk about foreign exchange risk in projects, and we forget that foreign exchange risk has a lot to do with the difference in productivity between two economies. And raising the productivity of emerging market economies is crucial. I think what you have said, we would, if you allow me, if you accept, we would love to publish as WAPP as one of our publications, because I think it has a lot of depth that will take, I think people need time to read it slowly and digest it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Georgie Arbashi is, Dr. Georgie Arbashi is Vice President of the Private Sector at the Development Bank of Latin America. He leads the activities of loans, partial credit guarantees, credit lines, syndications, blended finance, special debit vehicles, infrastructure and structured finance, SME finance, microcredit, financial inclusion instruments, and financial advisory services. I'm sure he has a team that does all these things. I can't think does it all by himself. He manages a $4.3 billion portfolio of assets in infrastructure, innovation, GovTech, and green tech and venture capital. Previously, he was Deputy Minister for International Affairs, Chief Economist in the Ministry of Planning, Executive Secretary of the Federal Commission on International Organizations, Executive Secretary of the Federal Government External Financing Commission, Senior Economic Advisor to the President of the Brazilian Development Bank, BNDES, Senior Economist at the World Bank, and Economist at the International Labour Organization. He has been a board member of BNDES, Petrobras, the oil company, BNDESPAR, Banco do Brasil, and the Brazil-China Business Council. He holds a PhD in economics and is a professor of economics at the University of Brasilia. So, having listened to Marco, I think now we're going to listen to more economics. And so this is fantastic. Georgie, the floor is yours.
Ziad, thank you very much. I'd like to thank UNCTAD and WAPP for inviting us for this very interesting conversation. Good morning to my panel colleagues. First of all, let me introduce very quickly CAF. Probably most of you may not know CAF. CAF is a regional development bank. We cover the Latin America region, 96% of the regional GDP, plus Spain and Portugal. This year, we will probably approve something like $15 billion in different types of financial instruments, including guarantees and loans and some others. We are very much committed to two principles. And the first one is to become the green bank of Latin America and the Caribbean. And the second one is to help the region to recover from the COVID crisis. I think that Marco has already mentioned many of the things that I wanted to mention. So I will skip the first part and talk about two other topics. The first one has to do with the need for the region to work more closely with the PPP agenda. There are many reasons beyond what Marco has already mentioned. I think that one has to do with the increasing urbanization of the region that requires a lot more infrastructure. You may not know, but Latin America is the most urbanized region in the world. So that requires a lot in terms of water, sanitation, electricity, urban development, and many other fields. A second thing has to do with the energy transition. As was already mentioned, there is a lot in terms of new demands, but at the same time, we have to take care of the past. So we have to take care of the past and of the future. So there is an increasing demand from the government side for it to provide services and infrastructure related to the past and the future. So of course, it is becoming even more difficult for the region to provide the services, the utilities that are needed for the economy and for the population. Another thing has to do with how to take care of the incoming demands or challenges. Of course, we have to look at the adaptation and the other aspects of the climate change, but we should also put a lot of our attention on productive transformation as well, mostly rooted on what Marco has already mentioned. But I'd like to emphasize one aspect there, and it has to do with the very attractive opportunities that many countries in the region have regarding the climate change. I'm talking about things related to green energy. The region has a very interesting amount of green energy already available. Many countries in the region have an energy matrix that is above 90% of the total. In some countries have 100% energy matrix, which is a lot. A big country like Brazil has 86% of its energy matrix already green. And there are some others. That's to say that there is a huge opportunity related to the availability of green energy for doing many things, including green manufacturing. This is one thing. The second thing is related to the critical minerals, lithium, copper, nickel, rare earth, and many others. This is also something very attractive for PPPs and for helping the region to tackle the increasing amount of challenges related to the past and to the future. And the third thing is related to water availability. As you may know, Latin America is the house of an extremely high portion of the fresh water in the world. It is important per se, but it is also very important for the green manufacturing. So again, we have another topic for considering doing PPPs in Brazil, in the region related to this aspect. But at the same time, although we have many interesting opportunities, there are fiscal constraints in most of the countries in the region. So they cannot per se face those challenges on their own. So that's when PPPs come into play for helping the region to not only to tackle those challenges, but also to go beyond in terms of improving quality of life, improving the productive transformation, the adaptation, and so on and so forth. There is, of course, an increasing infrastructure gap related to what was already mentioned. There is the environmental considerations in projects that was already mentioned. And one question is what CAF is doing in regard to that context. We are providing resources for PPPs, loans, and some other instruments. We are doing de-risking. For example, we are providing guarantees for big projects, including metro and others, so that we can reduce the risk related to those projects. And that has been working very well, and that has been helping attracting international companies into the region for being part of new PPPs. We have been providing technical assistance. This is perhaps the most single important aspect for developing PPPs in the region. We have been working with some other multilateral development banks in order to help structure PPPs and to help develop projects for them to become bankable, so they may not rely only in multilateral or development banks, but also on the capital and financial markets as well. We have been working on mobilization as well. We have a very interesting experiences, Yad, which we have a capital, an asset management arm, which is called CAF Asset Management. CAF has been working with pension funds and with third parties for them to put their money in PPPs. And so far, our experience has been very, very interesting, being in Uruguay, Colombia, and some other countries in different areas: water, railways, ports, roads, social infrastructure, and some others. And CAF participate not only through through CAFAN, but also with loans. We provide 10 to 20% of the financing needed, so that we provide the project with two different instruments that together reduce the risk and attract third parties for that or for those projects. We have been working with capacity building. We have a very interesting diploma on PPPs, which is very known in the region, and many officials and also third parties are attending those courses. We have been working on best practices with guidelines, handbooks, and frameworks for governments and for the private sector. We have a lot in terms of knowledge sharing, including books and some other publications and studies and research, dialogues with the academic and round tables, and so on and so forth. So altogether, I think that we have been doing something that so far has been very relevant to improve PPPs in the region, especially when we take into account the increasing need for governments to provide services for all those things that I have already mentioned, especially urbanization and the combination of the past and the future in terms of new infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Georgie. Really appreciate that. You've mentioned some things that I'd like to comment on. You've mentioned Latin American experience and the capacity building that you have programs and certification. In this part of the world, there's a lot, I mean, people know very little about Latin America and its experience. Most of the PPP is dominated by the experience of Anglo-Saxon countries, usually the UK, Australia, Canada. And really, I would like to say to everybody here that there's a lot more than that, a lot more than the Anglo-Saxon experience, which in many ways, especially the PFI version of it, has been very limited. And, you know, looking at the civil code experience of continental Europe as well as Latin America, I think for emerging markets, those experiences are a lot more relevant. So we at WAPP would like to take advantage of our contacts with all of you guys, with Latin American institutions, to hopefully have more activities in the future, webinars or meetings, conferences, even help maybe translate some of the materials that you have to be able to disseminate your experience in the world. So thank you very much for that. The other thing that Georgie touched on is, again, we're limited most of the time in thinking of certain types of PPPs. And we forget that areas that can be very, very, very important depending on what country you are from. PPPs in agriculture for countries that have good soil are very important. We rarely talk about PPPs in agriculture. Both Miguel and Georgie mentioned lithium and PPPs in mining. Mining activities done on a PPP basis instead of just on some contractual agreement with a company that is opportunistic. You know, if mining contracts can be done on a formal PPP basis with proper guidelines, with proper structure, with transparency, with all the right things that need to be done, and that's how we can protect the interests of people in our countries. Industrial PPPs. Some countries, I take the Philippines for example, the Philippines has 400 special economic zones. And this is an experience that can be expanded and looked at from other angles. Setting up industrial economic zones can be very important for depending on the type of country. And again, this is not something we think of. PPP is roads and hospitals and, you know, all the normal things, but we really need to expand as policymakers, as people involved in governments, in designing policies. We need to expand our horizons. Of course, there's a fourth type of PPP that is not relevant to us in emerging markets, but only in some markets, and I'm talking about space PPPs. And space PPPs are developing very rapidly. So with the time that we have left, I'm going to ask some questions of our panelists. I don't know what the technology is here. Do we have a microphone that we can take questions from the audience as well, or we don't? I don't know. Somebody answer? Does anybody know? No? Well, I don't know, maybe eventually we can try our luck and see if we can hear the questions from the audience. Maybe if people speak loud enough, but I'm surprised. I would have thought that there would be a floating microphone. Okay, well, anyway, sort of, maybe they didn't want us to have questions from the audience. They're worried about what we might have to say. Well, let me ask about the challenges that countries are facing in PPPs. I would like to talk about this topic. I'd like to talk about small-size PPPs, because small-size PPPs are important to many countries. And I'd like to talk about South-South cooperation in PPPs and how countries can, work together because there's a lot there that has to do not only with people and planet and prosperity, but has to do with peace. And cross-border PPPs are very important because you look at countries like France and Germany that fought two world wars against each other, millions of people dead. And at the end of the day, when they form a cross-border economic interest and relationship through the coal and steel community, it blossoms into becoming the European Union. And countries in Africa, countries in the Middle East, countries in Asia have a lot to learn from that and about how to link economies together in order to foster prosperity and foster peace. So let me start with the challenges, and I'll go to Miguel and ask him, in Mexico, what are the types of challenges that you have faced and overcome? How did you overcome them? And what are challenges that you may still have today?
Thank you. Well, as I mentioned, CAF has been a very important institution in the region in Latin America, and has been also a very important institution in Mexico. One of the challenges, believe it or not, when we try to structure some PPPs, this issue of the environment is very important.
No. Sorry, start again.
Sorry. Now you hear me? Yeah. No. Okay. Sorry. I was saying that CAF, the Corporación Andina de Fomento, is a very important and relevant institution in America Latina, also in Mexico. Probably one of the issues that we have faced in Mexico, when we try to structure any project like PPPs, one issue or one ingredient that is very important is the environmental issues. Then we are developing some projects in our country which are very relevant. I don't know how familiar you are with Mexico, but in the south of Mexico, where the Maya's culture was in place, we have on the construction of one train in the south of Mexico. It's called Tren Maya project. It's 1,500 kilometers of train, and it's going to be all around the south of Mexico. And we're trying to, with this project, to improve the benefit of the people living there. In that particular big project, or there's another project that is some sort of it's called Tren Interoceánico. It's going from one side to another side, like a channel of Panama in the narrow part of Mexico. And the idea is to have boats coming from Asia, go to this particular place, go into a train, 300 kilometers, and they go up to the American market from the west side. For example, these projects are very, very important, probably the most important in Mexico. And we, in the Ministry of Finance, we try to support them, and we say, let's try to have these projects, besides the PPP, also the ingredient of to have an ESG project. Let's try to provide all the elements to have ESG. And when we spoke to the institution in Mexico who are developing this project, say, oh, very good idea. What is ESG? That anybody has many idea of how we can do the framework and the objectives of the United Nations and so on. Then probably activities like CAF, who is doing very sophisticated and some programs to finance kind of things. Also, probably one of the challenges to have education. Believe it or not, but the education to the lower level, to the institution that has to generate this kind of project is not in place. We're talking about how to finance the lack of investment in Latin America. My colleagues has been very clear, but I think that education in the financial side, in the structural side, and in some objectives of the environmental side are very important. Then how do we are facing? We're in the Ministry of Finance. We are promoting seminars internally between all our institutions, like the Ministry of the Marines, the Defense, which are those institutions who are in charge to develop this kind of projects, and we're trying to create more culture and help and be supported by international institutions to have different seminars, and we're trying to support these kind of ideas to the local stock exchange market to provide some seminars, and then we are doing jointly efforts to have more education. It's good to have these big projects, but probably we have to go also to the roots in order to create the base.
Thank you very much.